Marcus Pemberton was 39 years old, a mechanical engineer who'd spent every night for 9 years in the garage behind his house, working on a sensor system most of his neighbors assumed was a hobby that never went anywhere. He drove a 12-year-old hatchback with a heater that took 10 minutes to warm up. On a Tuesday night in January, with 6 inches of snow already on the ground and more falling, his wife Renee stood in the doorway and told him to get out, that she was done waiting for the garage thing to turn into anything. Done explaining to her sister why her husband spent every evening with a soldering iron instead of a real career. He stood in the driveway in his shirt sleeves, snow collecting on his shoulders, and watched her lock the door behind him. 51 minutes later, a Gulfstream chartered by Vantage Aerospace Systems touched down at the regional airport, 12 miles away. It had come for him. He had no idea, standing in that driveway with snow in his collar, that his life had already changed before Renee finished locking the door. Before we go any further, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The snow was still coming down sideways when Marcus reached the end of the driveway and realized he didn't have his keys, his coat, or anywhere in particular to go. Marcus had spent 9 years building something in a detached garage that still smelled like sawdust from the workbench his father had left him. He drove that same 12-year-old hatchback with a check engine light he diagnosed himself and never bothered to fix, because it wasn't the actual problem. He wore the same canvas work jacket through 3 winters before Renee finally threw it out during a closet purge, and he'd never replaced it with anything warmer, because the cold reminded him to keep moving. Every night after his shift at Garrison Manufacturing, he ate dinner standing at the counter, then disappeared into the garage until 11 or later, working on a vibration sensor that could detect structural fatigue in steel framing before it became visible to the eye. He'd filed the patent 9 years earlier, with the help of a retired patent attorney 2 doors down, a woman who'd known his father. He was the kind of man who finished what he started, even when nobody else believed it was worth finishing. He had no idea that Vantage Aerospace Systems, an aerospace and infrastructure monitoring company he'd been quietly corresponding with for 3 years, had finally cleared the last of its legal review that week, or that its CEO didn't like to wait once a decision was made. Then came the Tuesday night Renee decided she was finished too. After that, nothing about the week went the way either of them expected. The kitchen light was the only one on in the house when Marcus came in from the garage that night, snow already an inch deep on the back steps and still falling hard enough to blur the porch light into a smear. Renee was at the table with her coat still on, like she'd been waiting for him in it. There was a glass of wine in front of her she hadn't touched. "We need to talk," she said. "Actually, I need to talk. You can just listen." He set his thermos on the counter and waited. "I've given this a lot of thought," she said. "I need something more than what this is, Marcus. I owe it to myself to be honest about that." He didn't say anything yet. "You spend every night out there," she said, gesturing toward the dark window, the garage just visible past the snow. 9 years, Marcus. 9 years of almost. My sister asked me last week what you actually do for a living, and I didn't have an answer that didn't sound like an apology. He looked at the wine glass. He looked at her coat, already on. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," she said. "But staying because it's comfortable isn't the same as it being right." He noticed, on the table beside her phone, a folded printout, a listing for a 2-bedroom condo 40 minutes away, the kind with a doorman and a view, well outside anything either of them could afford on his salary alone. He didn't ask about it. He filed it the way he filed a measurement that didn't match the drawing, without alarm, without conclusion, not yet. I think it's time you found somewhere else to be, she said. Tonight, honestly, I can't keep doing this back and forth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask who'd helped her pick out a condo with a view. He picked his keys up off the hook by the door, then realized, halfway through reaching for it, that the canvas jacket she'd thrown out last winter wasn't there to grab. I know this is a lot to drop on you tonight, of all nights, she said. And there was something rehearsed in it, the kind of apology that explains itself rather than the thing it's apologizing for. I'm sorry it has to be like this. Understood, he said. He stepped out the side door into the snow in his shirt sleeves. He heard the deadbolt turn behind him before he reached the end of the walk. 9 years earlier, Marcus had spent 4 months of his own savings, $11,000, nearly everything he had, building the first working prototype of the sensor in the garage his father had left him, after his father's heart attack put an end to the small machine shop the two of them had run together for a decade. He'd taken the job at Garrison Manufacturing to keep the mortgage paid, and worked on the sensor every night after, because it was the last thing he and his father had talked about. A way to catch the kind of fatigue crack that had taken down a pedestrian bridge 2 towns over back when Marcus was in college. He'd sold his motorcycle to cover the patent filing fee. He never told Renee that part. He just paid it. Helen Ashworth, retired now from 30 years of patent law, lived 2 doors down and had known his father since before Marcus was born. She'd filed the original application for him at cost, then kept filing the continuations every time the design improved, because she believed, she told him once, that he'd solved a problem the structural engineering industry had been chasing for a decade without admitting it. He hadn't thought much of the compliment at the time. He'd been too tired that week to think much of anything. He had noticed, over the past year, that Renee had started talking more about a co-worker's husband who'd actually made something of himself in commercial real estate, and about a client of hers, a procurement consultant named Grant Sorensen, who kept finding reasons to stop by with paperwork that didn't need to be dropped off in person. He'd told himself it was nothing. He extended the kind of good faith a man extends when he spent his whole life believing things hold together if you build them right. That was what Renee had never bothered to find out, not what he was building in that garage, but what it had already cost him, and what it was about to be worth. Her name was Helen Ashworth. She'd been managing Marcus's patent filings for 9 years, and she was the one who called him at 11:40 that night, 20 minutes after Vantage Aerospace's jet had already landed, to tell him a car was on its way to pick him up from wherever he was standing. "I'm going to lay this out in order," she said, once he was in the car and the heat had finally caught up to his hands. "You need to hear all of it before you say anything." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Vantage cleared the final review on the licensing agreement this afternoon," she said. "Owen Whitfield wants you in front of the board by 9 tomorrow morning to finalize it. The number on the table is $340 million over the life of the contract, with an upfront payment of $42 million on signing." He sat with that for a moment. A short silence. He pressed his palm flat against the cold window glass, the way he'd press a hand against a weld to check for vibration, more out of habit than need. "There's more," she said. "And you're not going to like this part." She told him that 2 weeks earlier, Vantage's legal team had flagged a second submission, a rival proposal from a smaller firm offering nearly identical technical specifications at a lower licensing rate. The firm belonged to a man named Grant Sorensen. Marcus thought of the folded condo listing on the kitchen table. He hadn't reached a conclusion about it that night. He reached one now. How would he have the specs? Marcus said. Not a question with much air left in it. That's what Vantage's counsel wanted to know too, Helen said. The drawings in his submission matched your third-generation prototype, the one you only ever printed at home, before the patent continuation was even filed. By the time Marcus reached the hangar office where Walter Briggs, the licensing attorney Helen had brought in for the closing, was waiting with a single folder, the picture had filled in further. Walter laid it out without ceremony. Sorensen's firm registered 4 months ago, Walter said. He's filed himself as principal, no partners listed, but the bank records subpoenaed as part of Vantage's standard diligence show a $9,000 deposit into the firm's account in November, transferred from an account in Renee Pemberton's name. Marcus looked at the bank record. He recognized the date. It was the week Renee had told him she was picking up a few extra interior design clients to cover Christmas. She funded his bid. Marcus said, with money that was, by any reasonable accounting, half yours, Walter said. Whether that matters for tonight's signing or not, it's going to matter for whatever comes after it. Marcus looked at the documents spread across the folding table in the hangar office for a long time. Then he stood and moved around to the other side, where he could see the rival submissions drawings laid next to his own original sketches. He approached it the way he approached a fatigue reading that didn't match the model, not fixing on any one number first, just scanning the whole pattern until the shape of it became clear. He could see it now. How long this had been in motion, and how little of it had anything to do with whether the garage thing would ever turn into anything. She didn't think it would close, Marcus said. She thought she had time to get there first, with him. She didn't, Walter said. It closed this afternoon. He didn't act immediately. He signed with Vantage at 8:51 the next morning. 9 minutes ahead of the board meeting, in a glass conference room 30 floors above a city he'd never had a reason to visit before. Owen Whitfield shook his hand and told him the upfront payment would clear within 5 business days. Marcus thanked him, asked 2 precise questions about the manufacturing timeline, and didn't mention Grant Sorensen once. Vantage's general counsel had already begun pulling Sorensen's firm apart on her own initiative 2 weeks earlier. The moment the matching specifications were flagged, not because anyone had told her to look at Renee, but because a $9,000 capital injection from an unrelated personal account 3 weeks before a major bid is the kind of detailed diligence teams are trained to notice. She'd found the wire transfer, then the timeline, then the texts between Sorensen and a number registered to Renee Pemberton, turned over as part of the firm's own compliance review once Sorensen's submission was disqualified for trade secret misappropriation. Renee called Marcus 4 times over the following week. He let the first 3 go to voicemail. The 4th message had a different register than the others. The composure in the first had developed an edge by the 4th. "I'm hearing things about Grant's company," she said, "and I really think you and I need to talk before this turns into something it doesn't need to be." He listened to all 4 messages once, back to back, in the hangar parking lot before a flight to the manufacturing facility in North Carolina. He noted the shift. He filed it. He didn't move fast. That was the part Renee had never managed to account for. In 8 years of marriage, and however many months of helping Grant build a bid off drawings she'd seen taped to the garage corkboard. She'd spent a long time deciding what kind of man she was dealing with, and she'd gotten the central thing wrong. She'd read his patience, 9 years of quiet, unglamorous work in a cold garage, as proof he'd never amount to anything. It wasn't proof of that. It was the only method he knew, and it was the same method that had just closed a $340 million contract while she was still telling her sister he didn't have a real career. 3 weeks after the signing, Marcus called Renee himself. His voice was level, almost collaborative. "I think we should talk this through with attorneys, not on the phone," he said. "I'd like to do it properly. Walter's office, Thursday." "I'd like that," she said, and he could hear the relief she wasn't quite managing to keep out of her voice. Relief that told him she still believed whatever was coming could be smoothed over the way most things between them eventually had been. I think that's the mature way to handle it. Thursday, then, he said, and ended the call. Helen, sitting across from him at her kitchen table, had been listening the whole time. She thinks it's already smoothed over, Marcus said. Helen didn't say anything. She just refilled his coffee and started reading through Walter's notes for Thursday. Marcus reached Walter's office 16 minutes before anyone was expected. He preferred it that way. The conference room had a long table and a window looking out over a parking structure, and at that hour the morning light came in flat and pale. The kind of light that made every page on the table look like exactly what it was. Walter arrived at 9:40, followed by Vantage's outside counsel, a woman named Diane Castellano, carrying a single thin folder. They set their documents along one side of the table without hurry, the unhurried pace of people who'd already done the hard part of the work somewhere else. Renee came in at 10 exactly. Her attorney, a step behind her. She dressed carefully, the same wool coat she'd had on the night she handed Marcus his keys. She looked at Marcus once, a quick, unreadable nod, then turned her attention to Walter, as though Marcus were simply a party to a meeting she expected to manage. Before we get into terms, her attorney began. I want to say we're hoping today can move things in a fair direction for. There are a few matters that need to be acknowledged first, Walter said, before any discussion of terms. He nodded to Diane Castellano, who opened her folder and set the first document on the table. Grant Sorensen's firm submitted a competing licensing proposal to Vantage Aerospace Systems in November, using technical drawings substantially identical to Marcus Pemberton's patented design, she said. Vantage's diligence team determined those drawings could only have come from physical access to Mr. Pemberton's prototype materials. The submission was disqualified for trade secret misappropriation, and Vantage has referred the matter to its outside fraud counsel. Renee's attorney looked down at the page. Whatever ease he'd arrived with had gone quiet in his posture. Diane placed a second document on the table, the wire transfer record, dated. The amount circled, a $9,000 transfer from an account held solely by Renee Pemberton into Sorensen Consulting's operating account 4 days before the firm's registration was finalized, she said. Text records, also produced in Vantage's review, show ongoing communication between Mr. Sorensen and Miss Pemberton regarding the specifications throughout the bid period. Renee's expression hadn't moved. The effort of keeping it still was visible to anyone looking closely. Marcus was looking closely. I want to be precise about what's being presented today, Walter said. We're not asserting criminal exposure in this room. We're confirming that this documentation exists, that it's preserved, and that it's already part of the record in Vantage's civil claim against Sorensen Consulting, a claim that names the funding source. That's not what this was, Renee said, the first thing she'd said since sitting down. There's one more item, Walter said, and set down a third document, Marcus's original 2017 patent filing, his name alone on the inventor line, predating the marriage's joint accounts by 2 years and held in his sole name throughout. The license Mr. Pemberton signed last week is for intellectual property solely owned by him, filed before the marriage, and never transferred or assigned to any joint entity. It is not, and has never been, marital property. The room went quiet for a stretch. Marcus counted 8 seconds. We'll take some time to review, Walter said. Marcus stood. He hadn't brought anything to the table beyond what Walter had already laid out, and it had done what it needed to do. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Walter's hand, then Diane's. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back. He spoke to Renee directly, not loudly, not for the room. For her. "You told me to find somewhere else to be," he said. "I did. It just wasn't where you thought." He walked out. He didn't look back. It didn't unravel in a single week. By spring, Vantage's civil claim against Sorensen Consulting had cost Grant his only 2 other clients, both of whom pulled out once the misappropriation filing became public record in the county court system. He let go of the lease on his downtown office in April. Renee's design clients, several of them referred, over the years, through people Marcus had worked alongside at Garrison, stopped calling that winter. Word moves quietly, but completely through a town that size. She was carrying what she'd chosen to carry, and it didn't announce itself dramatically. It was just constant, a deposit she couldn't make. A name that no longer opened doors it used to. Marcus, in the meantime, was building something. He wasn't in a hurry about it. He never had been. He used part of the signing payment to buy the old machine shop building his father had once run, 2 streets over from the garage, and put his own name on the lease the week the renovation permits cleared. He hired 4 people that spring. A 5th started in June. He returned every message the same day. He gave timelines and met them. 14 months after the meeting in Walter's office, Marcus's new workshop had room for 6 benches and a loading dock, and the same dented thermos from his father sat on a shelf above his desk. Helen Ashworth had a standing invitation to Friday lunch, which she usually accepted, and she liked to remind him, when the conversation drifted that way, that she'd told him 9 years earlier he'd solved something the industry had been chasing for a decade. He hadn't believed her at the time. He believed her now. He still wore canvas work jackets. He bought 3 that spring, all the same style, all on sale, because that was the kind of thing that hadn't changed. On a clear morning the following January, almost exactly 1 year after the night in the driveway, Marcus stood outside the new workshop, watching the season's first real snow start to come down. A cup of coffee from the same dented thermos warming his hands. The loading dock light was on. Somewhere behind him, his newest hire was running a vibration test on a prototype sensor mounted to a steel beam, double-checking a reading Marcus had already checked once himself. He finished the coffee. He zipped his canvas jacket against the cold and walked the length of the dock once, slowly, the way he always did before signing off on a day's work. He didn't think about the driveway, or the locked door, or the snow collecting on his shoulders that night. There wasn't much left of any of it worth thinking about. He checked the sensor reading himself. Steady, he nodded to his hire, turned and went back inside, out of the snow. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've got 2 more picked out that I think you'll really enjoy.